Have you ever watched someone rewrite the story of your life without your permission? Right in front of an audience? That's exactly what happened to me on a cool September evening, 10 floors above downtown Chicago, at a rooftop restaurant that was supposed to host a celebration. The occasion? My stepdaughter Ruby's engagement party. The guest list? Family, close friends, colleagues from both sides. The view? Breathtaking. And the moment? Utterly unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. My name is Michael Torres. I'm 47, I manage enterprise systems for a logistics firm, and I tend to keep things simple. I wear the same watch I've worn since 2004. I like routines. I believe in keeping your promises. I thought my wife, Elena, did too. But right between the toast to Ruby's future and the serving of the creme brulee, Elena stood up, raised her glass, and said she had an announcement of her own. Everyone smiled. They thought it would be something sweet, a blessing, a story about young love. Instead, she said this: I've decided to move forward with someone who truly understands me, someone who sees me. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then eyes turned toward the man seated 3 chairs down, her therapist. But what Elena didn't know was that I had an announcement of my own, waiting quietly in my inside jacket pocket. One, she would never forget. I didn't say anything right away. I just sat there watching her smile like she was proud of herself. People around the table looked confused, some uncomfortable, some frozen. Ruby's fiancé fidgeted in his seat, clearly unsure whether this was a joke or some twisted toast. But I knew it was real. I'd known for weeks that something like this was coming, just not here, not now. Elena and I met 15 years ago at a non-profit mental health clinic where she was working as a counselor. I was volunteering, helping upgrade their server systems on the weekends. She was warm, articulate, the kind of person who could disarm you with a question and a smile. We got coffee after a long day of wiring routers and talking about work stress. One cup turned into several months of conversations, then a shared apartment, then a courthouse wedding. No fanfare. Just us and a couple of friends. She had a daughter, Ruby, from a previous relationship. Her biological father was long gone, never once showing up to a school play or birthday, so I stepped in. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I took Ruby to piano lessons, taught her to ride a bike, helped her build her first science fair project. For all practical purposes, she was mine. The first few years were good. Elena worked part-time in counseling, and I took a stable IT position with a logistics firm just outside the city. We had goals, routines, matching mugs. Nothing glamorous, but we were solid, or at least I thought we were. Things started changing, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. Elena left her job citing burnout. She said she needed time to realign, to find clarity. I supported her. Took on extra hours when the firm needed help with a system migration, paid off her car, covered her student loans. I figured it was a rough patch and we'd get through it together. That's when she started seeing Dr. Brandon Cole, a therapist she said was helping her reconnect with her identity. At first I was glad. I thought maybe this would help her get back to center, but something about the way she talked about him felt off. She mentioned him often, too often. Brandon said this. Brandon thinks that. Brandon understands. Then came the home sessions. She said it helped her open up more in a safe environment. Sometimes she'd tell me to leave the house for a few hours while they worked through emotional processing. I didn't push. I wanted to respect her process. I trusted her, but I'm not naive. One night I came home early from a canceled meeting and saw his car pulling away. The session was supposed to end at 6. It was almost 10. Elena met me at the door, cheeks flushed, robe loosely tied. She said they'd gone deep into inner child trauma and lost track of time. Right. That night I waited until she was asleep and checked her tablet. She'd left it unlocked. I wasn't proud of it, but I also wasn't about to keep pretending everything was fine. The messages weren't just unethical, they were personal. Intimate, familiar in a way that no therapist-client relationship should ever be. Brandon had texted her a selfie from her kitchen. He'd written, "Can't wait till we don't have to hide anymore. Tonight felt real." I didn't confront her. Not immediately. Because while Elena and Brandon were preparing for their big reveal, I was preparing something of my own. The next day I called Susan Miles, an old friend from college who had since become one of the most respected family law attorneys in Cook County. She listened quietly, asked smart questions, and then said, "Michael, if you want to protect yourself, we start now." Today. We began with the postnup. Elena had signed it 3 years ago when I inherited a modest property in Michigan after my mother passed. At the time, she said she understood completely and didn't want to complicate things with entitlements. I'd insisted she meet with her own attorney before signing. She did, and she signed. Susan helped me quietly shift liquid assets into a trust earmarked for Ruby's education and future. Not a single cent was hidden. Every move was legal, transparent, and documented. I also gathered everything: text screenshots, bank statements, a time-stamped log of Brandon's visits. I wasn't building a case for revenge. I was building a shield. Weeks passed. Elena became distant, distracted. She started talking more openly about self-actualization, about how some people grow faster than others. I knew what she was setting up. A clean narrative, a gentle exit. One where I was the emotionally unavailable workaholic and she was the brave woman choosing happiness. And then Ruby got engaged. Elena offered to plan the party, said it would be a perfect way to celebrate new beginnings. She had no idea how perfect it would be, because while she spent weeks rehearsing the moment she would break free from the man she claimed was holding her back, I was quietly printing copies of the paperwork that would free me from the woman who had already left in every way that mattered. I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was clear. And clarity, I've learned, is the most powerful thing a person can carry into a room where everyone expects you to be broken. Once the clarity settled in, I began to pay attention, not just to what Elena said, but to what she didn't say. The silence between her words became more revealing than the words themselves. Our conversations, once effortless, had turned transactional. "Can you grab almond milk on your way home? Don't forget Ruby's catering deposit. Brandon says mindfulness reduces workplace stress." I'd stopped asking her how she was, because by then I already knew the answer. She wasn't here, not with me, not really. She was somewhere else entirely, building a future that didn't include the man who had been quietly paying for the last one. So I began planning. Methodically, unemotionally. Like I do at work when we have a major systems migration and everyone else is panicking. First step, information. I installed a security app on our shared home network that tracked logins and unusual activity. Every time she connected to a private WhatsApp web client or used her laptop late at night, I knew. I created an encrypted folder on my personal drive, where I stored copies of chats, photos, email headers, even calendar entries labeled therapy session that overlapped with hotel bookings I found on our shared credit card history. I was careful. No accusations, no outbursts. I made sure the timing worked in my favor, not hers. Around this time, Elena began floating the idea of reimagining our financial independence. She suggested closing our joint investment account and dividing the funds. Just to make things cleaner, she said. She framed it as a wellness exercise, a way for each of us to reclaim autonomy. I told her I'd think about it. What I actually did was call Susan again. She said, "Michael, it's starting. That's the soft open before the exit. You have a limited window to protect yourself before she tries to move first." We re-reviewed the postnup, ironclad. If she initiated an affair, especially one with someone in a professional capacity, the provisions kicked in immediately. She forfeited rights to anything acquired since the agreement. Retirement accounts, property gains, liquid savings. Even spousal support was off the table. Elena had signed it, with a witness, with her own attorney present. But that wasn't enough, for me. I didn't want a messy courtroom saga. I wanted a conclusion she couldn't contest. One so complete, so quietly devastating, that there'd be no question of who betrayed whom. So I started preparing the trust transfer. I legally signed over ownership of our house, not to myself, but to Ruby. It was done through a living family trust managed by an external fiduciary. Elena's name was quietly removed from the deed. She didn't notice. She never asked. I think she assumed I was still asleep, that I was the dependable fool who would keep showing up with groceries and patient eyes while she choreographed her escape. She didn't know the locks were already changing, that the accounts were already split, that the money she believed she could rely on was being redirected to the very daughter she thought would support her once she made her move, and she was planning the move. That much was clear. One evening, I came home to find her sitting at the kitchen island with Brandon, not for a session, not for a consultation. They were drinking wine, casual, comfortable, barefoot. "Oh," she said, startled but not guilty. "We were just going over wedding gift ideas for Ruby." Brandon smiled, a smile that didn't belong in my kitchen. I didn't flinch. I hung up my jacket, said I had a late call, and went to my office. I spent the next hour finalizing the packet. A clean, crisp stack of documents, postnup references, dated communication logs, real estate transfers, and a notarized declaration of breach. I printed 3 copies and placed one in a plain manila envelope. Not dramatic, just businesslike. I knew she wanted a performance. She imagined a moment where she announced her truth, gained applause, and walked away from me with the applause of others in her ears. Instead, I gave her silence. I didn't argue. I didn't demand answers. I let her build her illusion of power, let her rehearse it in front of the mirror and with Brandon. I let them script their narrative. But I had something better than a script. I had facts. I had the law. And more importantly, I had the moral high ground. When Ruby announced the date for her engagement dinner, Elena offered to plan the whole thing. Said she wanted it to feel meaningful. She chose the venue, curated the guest list, even had printed menus delivered to our home in ribboned envelopes. That's when I knew it was coming. The exit. The reveal. The moment she'd step into the spotlight and tell the world she was bravely choosing her happiness. She was going to do it in front of our daughter, our friends, our family, at an event meant to celebrate love and commitment. And she believed I would sit there, silent, stunned, defeated. What she didn't know was that I'd already spoken to the venue manager. I'd already timed the moment. I knew what she would say, and I knew exactly when to reach into my jacket pocket and hand her the envelope that would end the performance before it began. Not with a fight, but with a signature, and the quiet sound of everything she'd built falling apart. The evening of the engagement party arrived with the kind of autumn air that feels expensive, crisp, clean, with just a whisper of the city's distant noise hanging above it all. The rooftop restaurant Elena had chosen overlooked the skyline from an old converted printing building in River North. It was the kind of place with Edison bulbs, reclaimed wood tables, and a jazz trio playing too softly for anyone to actually hear. Everything was perfect. On the surface. Ruby looked radiant. Her fiancé, James, nervous but proud. Friends mingled, glasses clinked, small talk floated like smoke over the tables. Elena played hostess with practiced ease, smiling as if nothing in the world could touch her. She moved between guests like a stage director on opening night. I had rehearsed my role too. My suit was pressed. My words were memorized. My envelope was tucked neatly into the inside pocket of my jacket, right beneath my heart, which, oddly, wasn't racing at all. As dessert was cleared, Ruby stood to thank everyone. She gave a short, sincere speech about love, gratitude, and new beginnings. There were tears, applause, the kind of moment that tightens your throat if you're paying attention. Then Elena rose, her glass in hand, her voice steady. "I'd like to say something," she said, smiling. Not just as Ruby's mother, but as a woman who believes in honesty, even when it's hard. I looked at her, and for a split second I wondered if she might pivot. If maybe the reality of the moment, the people watching, the daughter glowing with happiness, might bring her back from the edge. It didn't. "I've decided to move forward with someone who truly understands me," she said. "Someone who helps me feel seen, heard, supported. Michael and I have been growing in different directions for some time now, and I think it's finally time I live honestly." There was a beat of stunned silence, then a murmur. A few guests looked at each other. Ruby froze. I kept my eyes on Elena. She was glowing, not from joy, from triumph. Her hand reached subtly across the table, toward Brandon, and that was her mistake. That was the moment Ruby's gaze followed her mother's movement, and landed on the man she'd hugged earlier that night, her therapist, her supposed friend. Brandon's hand twitched, then retracted, slightly but not fast enough. "Wait," Ruby said quietly but audibly. "Him?" Elena hesitated. "It's complicated." "With your therapist?" Ruby's voice was louder now. Her face had gone pale. Elena turned toward her. "Sweetheart, we didn't mean for it to happen, but real connection." I stood, then calm straight. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the envelope, walked around the table, held it out to Elena without a word. She blinked at it. "What is this?" she asked, her smile faltering. I didn't answer, just nodded at her to open it. She peeled it open slowly. Her hands shook slightly, whether from nerves or cold I couldn't tell. She scanned the first page, then the second. Her face changed, confusion, then recognition, then something that looked like fear. She looked up at me. "What is this?" she repeated, but her voice was smaller now. Uncertain. "Page 3, I said. "That's the important one." She turned to it. The room was dead silent. Even the jazz trio had stopped playing, sensing the storm. Elena's lips moved without sound as she read. Her eyes widened. "You can't do this," she said, suddenly loud again. "This isn't legal." "It is," I said. "It's not even complicated. You signed the postnup yourself. With your lawyer in the room, you breached it the moment. Your relationship with Brandon became more than professional." She opened her mouth and closed it again. Ruby was still staring. People were whispering now. Brandon cleared his throat, trying to salvage what he could. "I think we should all—" "No," I interrupted calmly. "You don't get to guide this conversation. Not here. Not now." Elena dropped the envelope onto the table like it had burned her fingers. Her face was red, but her voice trembled with a kind of disbelief, as though she still thought she might regain control of the scene. "You planned this," she hissed. I nodded. "I did." "You knew I was going to—" "Yes." "And you didn't say anything?" "No. Because I wanted everyone to hear it from you. I wanted them to know exactly what kind of person you are, without me needing to explain it." Brandon stood, then froze. Elena looked at him, eyes pleading. "Say something," she whispered. He took a deep breath. "Let's just go. This doesn't need to get worse." But it already had. Ruby stood up. "Mom," she said, voice trembling. "You slept with the man I trusted with my secrets, and you decided to blow up your marriage at my engagement party." Elena reached for her, but Ruby stepped back. "I didn't want to hurt anyone," Elena said. "But you did," Ruby replied. "And now you get to live with it." And just like that, the illusion collapsed. No grand new beginning, no applause, no graceful exit. Just a woman standing in a dress she picked for attention, holding a glass that no one wanted to clink, and across from her, the man she thought was sleeping, holding the truth in an envelope that ended her performance before the final act. I turned to the guests and spoke only once that night. "Apologies, everyone. Dinner's on me." Then I looked at Ruby, nodded toward the door, and together we walked into the cool night air while the party behind us finally fell silent. The elevator ride down was quiet, just me and Ruby. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there with her arms crossed, breathing slowly like someone trying not to cry. When we stepped onto the street, She finally spoke. How long did you know? About 2 months, I said. I found a message on her tablet. After that, I kept my head down and started putting things in place. She looked at me with something between sadness and admiration. You didn't say anything. There wasn't a point in saying it before the people who needed to hear it were listening. We stood outside for a while, just watching cars drift past. Across the street, a valet whistled for a cab. Inside, I imagined the guests quietly gathering their things, whispering in corners. Elena was probably still at the table, stunned. Or maybe chasing Brandon out the back entrance, I didn't care. The next morning, the fallout began in earnest. I received an email from the restaurant manager thanking me for covering the entire bill, along with an apology for the unfortunate disruption. Several friends sent quiet messages of support. One even called it the most restrained mic drop they'd ever witnessed. But from Elena, radio silence until the next afternoon. She showed up at the house, our house, but now legally titled in Ruby's name, thanks to the trust transfer I'd completed weeks earlier. I need to talk to you, she said, her voice strained. You're not on the deed anymore, I replied. Legally, this isn't your house, her jaw clenched. Michael, come on. We need to handle this like adults. We did, I said. You made your announcement, I made mine. Now we're just dealing with the paperwork. She tried to push past me, but I blocked the door. Let me guess, I said. Brandon's not answering your calls? She didn't respond. Just stared at me, her lips pressed into a thin, pale line. You blew up your marriage for a man who doesn't want to be seen with you in daylight, I said. You gambled everything and thought I'd sit quietly while you rewrote the ending. Don't act like you're perfect, she snapped. I'm not, I said. But I am prepared. And right now, that's the difference between us. That night, she sent a long, meandering email, part apology, part justification. She said she'd been feeling lost for years, that Brandon had helped her reconnect with herself, that she never planned to fall for him, but that emotions are complicated, that maybe I had withdrawn too. It was the kind of letter people write, to themselves more than to the person they've hurt. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the message to Susan. She added it to the file. A paper trail of poor choices. Meanwhile, Ruby stopped returning her mother's calls. Not out of cruelty, but self-preservation. The woman who had raised her had chosen the most important night of her adult life to stage a dramatic exit and drag her therapist along for the ride. That betrayal cut deeper than Elena realized. As for Brandon, the story didn't end at dinner. I filed a formal ethics complaint with the state licensing board, backed by messages, timelines, and records of their interactions while he was actively treating Elena. It turned out I wasn't the first to report him. 2 other complaints had already been filed by former clients, one of them eerily similar. 3 weeks later, I got a notice that Brandon's license had been suspended pending a full investigation. When I read that email, I didn't feel victorious, just finished. Elena tried reaching out again. She wanted to discuss options, perhaps negotiate a settlement. Her attorney suggested mediation. Susan replied with a concise message. Elena had violated the postnup and Michael was under no obligation to offer anything beyond what she entered the marriage with. No house, no savings, no claim to the trust fund in Ruby's name. Just her clothes and the debts I'd paid off during our 14 years together. Her attorney tried one more time, floating a vague threat about emotional hardship. Susan shut it down with 3 words: breach, documentation, and irrevocable. And, just like that, the unraveling was complete. Elena wasn't ruined, but she was revealed to friends, to family, to herself. Brandon faded from her life within weeks. Last I heard, he'd moved to another state to avoid the mounting scrutiny. Elena stayed in the city, but not in the circles we used to share. Invitations dried up. Sympathy ran out. People may forgive mistakes, but they rarely forget who was smiling when the damage was done. And me? I got up the next morning and went to work, logged in, answered emails, made coffee. The world hadn't ended, but for Elena, it had certainly changed. Life has a strange way of restoring balance once the noise fades. In the weeks after the party, the silence became a kind of comfort. No more awkward dinners, no more guessing games, no more wondering if my own home was a performance stage for someone else's storyline. Just peace. I moved into a furnished loft in Old Town, close enough to work, far enough from memory. It wasn't flashy, but it was clean, quiet, mine. I filled the space slowly. A coffee table I built myself, a record player I hadn't used in years, photographs that I picked, not ones chosen to match a curated wall. Every item felt like a step toward something real again. Ruby came by often. She was the only part of that marriage I missed without hesitation. Her loyalty surprised me, but maybe it shouldn't have. She'd grown up watching, listening, noticing. More than Elena realized. One night we ordered Thai food and sat on the floor eating out of takeout boxes like we used to when she was a kid. She looked up at me between bites. "I'm sorry she did that to you," she said. "You don't need to apologize," I replied. "I know. I don't know how she became that person." I didn't have an answer. People don't always transform. Sometimes they just remove the mask they've worn for so long you forgot it was a mask. About a month after the party, Elena reached out again. This time there was no pretense. She wrote simply, "I lost everything. I know you think I deserve it. Maybe I do. But I'm still trying to understand how it all happened so fast." I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. She had chosen her exit long before I handed her that envelope. All I did was make sure she landed in the place she'd worked so hard to reach, without dragging me or Ruby down with her. I heard through a mutual friend that Brandon had officially surrendered his license. He was trying to open a coaching business in another city. It didn't matter. He was gone. Elena, meanwhile, had taken a part-time job at a wellness studio in the suburbs. Nothing wrong with that, except that she used to speak about those places with quiet disdain. She'd traded high-minded philosophies for laminated chore charts and retail smile politeness. Maybe that's what accountability looks like when it arrives in small, relentless doses. Once she tried showing up at Ruby's office unannounced. Just wanted to talk. Ruby told her to schedule an appointment like anyone else. That hurt, I'm sure. But it was fair. People often believe consequences are cruel. But more often than not, they're just proportionate. As for me, I slept better than I had in years. No 2 a.m. conversations spinning in my head, no double-checking phone bills, no second-guessing whether love should feel like waiting for a door to close. I started going back to the gym, reconnected with old friends I hadn't seen in a while. One of them, a woman I'd worked with years ago, invited me to a gallery opening. I went. Not as a statement, not as a pivot, just because I wanted to. There's a quiet dignity in starting over when you've been brought low. In knowing that while someone else was rehearsing their grand betrayal, you were quietly setting the foundation for your own freedom. Elena lost more than assets and status. She lost trust, respect, the grace of a clean break, and no matter how often she replays that night in her head, she'll always remember that she was the one who turned a daughter's celebration into a cautionary tale. And me? I was just a man who stopped waiting for someone to do the right thing, and did what needed to be done. No speeches, no drama, just a plan, an envelope, and the dignity to walk away while everything around me finally came to light. I've been asked whether I feel like I won. That word feels misplaced. This wasn't a competition. There was no scoreboard. What happened wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. About refusing to be rewritten by someone who didn't have the courage to end things honestly. Elena didn't lose because I outsmarted her. She lost because she thought no one was paying attention, that she could build a lie high enough that it would look like a life. But lies are heavy. They collapse eventually. The real win, if you want to call it that, was peace. Clarity. Waking up in the morning and knowing I didn't let someone else's chaos rewrite my values. I protected my future and my daughters. And I did it without raising my voice. 6 months later, I gave a short toast at Ruby's wedding. I kept it simple. To love that grows in sunlight, not in secrets. Afterward, she hugged me and whispered, "That's the dad I'll always choose." And that was more than enough. What do you think matters more in moments like this? Patience or preparation? I'd love to hear your thoughts below. And if this story spoke to you, even just one moment of it, consider subscribing for more stories where the truth speaks louder than the drama. Sometimes, the quietest people carry the most powerful endings.